Hello everyone, DarkOfAllTrades here. Now this type of video is meant to be educational. I want to help people learn how to think and not what to think. For this video, I was digging around looking for material for a new atheist content, and I happened upon a channel called Real at the Wheel. He says his name is Christopher, so I'll call him that. A lot of his videos are recorded while he is driving, which I do not recommend. As I am a cartoon character, if I wanted to do it, it would be fine. But as a disclaimer, please do not drive distracted. Do not record videos while you are driving, especially on public roads. If you want to do it on your own private property, then I can't really stop you, but please don't do it where you can hurt others or even just yourself. He goes through a handful of topics on his channel, and not all religious topics, so this should be interesting. Let's see what this guy has to say.
So, ADD, ADHD, and depression are all...
I watched a few of his videos before settling on this one to start. He has some really ignorant opinions and is wrong a lot of the time. Most of his thoughts so far has just been his opinion on things. He doesn't like pride and doesn't think it should be something celebrated. Okay, while he is already monumentally wrong and espousing damaging viewpoints, that is the reason why Pride Month is so important. I can just brush some of these terrible opinions off. This is until I got to his video titled ADD, ADHD, Depression Are Not Real! As someone diagnosed with ADD as a child and depression as an adult, as well as having many friends with these conditions as well, I would guess there will be some points I can address.
And I'll tell you why they're... It's because nobody can take your blood and run the tests and tell you that you have ADD. Nobody can take your blood and run a test and tell you have ADHD or depression. You just can't do it.
Well, starting out with a strong claim here, there are some papers that show that evidence for ADHD can be found in certain blood tests dating back to 2011 in an article on the National Library of Medicine, source in the description. So this isn't 100% accurate. Just doing a simple search brought me this image. Not starting off great. The exact same search for depression shows that yes, depression can be discovered through blood tests. So yes, we can. However, just for fun, let me grant this point. Why do you think this is, Christopher? Do you think that any condition that can't be tested and discovered by taking blood isn't a real condition? A brief search on the old Google machine shows me a number of conditions that can't be found with a blood test. Dementia, Parkinson's, MS, epilepsy, and even according to Hospice of Queen Anne's, certain types of cancer won't show up on a blood test. Does this mean you think that prostate cancer isn't real? Simply because no one can take your blood, run the tests, and tell you you have pancreatic cancer, does that mean pancreatic cancer doesn't actually exist?
They have now come out and said that depression is not caused by a chemical imbalance, which I always knew that was because if somebody has a chemical imbalance, please show me the person who has the perfect balance. What is that? I would love to know. But it doesn't exist. We're all different. So my age is really the generation where ADD and ADHD became the probably billion-dollar industry that it became. And it doesn't make sense to me. Like, well, it makes complete sense to me. You have some kid who's in school who won't sit down and he's not interested in his schoolwork. So his parents, his lazy parents, take him to a doctor and say, oh, he won't do his schoolwork. He moves around a lot. And then the doctor, who is paid off from the prescription companies, from the medical companies, says, oh, well, your son has ADD. Let me just give him some Adderall, let me give him some Ritalin, and then we can turn him into a zombie, and you don't have to focus on the real issue, and then everything will be okay. But then that kid's gonna grow up to be 30 years old with a drug problem, isolated, without an education. Well, he might get an education, but he's going to have more problems than he knows what to do with. He's going to keep going back to the psychiatrist. Psychiatrist is going to keep telling him something is wrong with him. They're never going to get to the root of the problem, and the cycle just continues and continues. This happens over and over and over again.
I was on Ritalin as a child. At 30, I didn't have a drug problem. I certainly was not isolated. I actually have been super extroverted all of my life, including when I was on Ritalin. And while yes, I have my own problems, I know what to do with them. I work on my problems and constantly grow and change as a person. So sure, I can grant that there are some people who fall into this, but I have not seen statistics on this, and my experience with it tells me a very different story.
So, if you're telling me ADD, ADHD, and depression, I'm going to do a whole video on depression, but if you're telling me these things exist and they're real, show me the blood tests that come back ADD, ADHD positive. I would love to see it. I don't want to see some test on a computer screen that anyone can go and game. Give me proof. Give me real evidence, proof that these things exist. The burden of proof is not on me. These things do not exist. It's up to you to show me definite proof that these things do exist.
Okay, this may be a fair point. Perhaps, Christopher, you have never been around people who have depression or ADHD. The burden of proof is on the person making the positive claim. Keep in mind that asserting something doesn't exist is also a claim that adopts a burden of proof. But you want proof? I think I can manage that. To be clear, I am not an expert in any medical field, and I would venture a guess that you are not as well. That's okay, we don't need to be. Let's see what the experts say. Who do we trust for medical information? I would say the Mayo Clinic as well as Johns Hopkins. Of course, if you want other sources as well, please let me know and I can get more. The Mayo Clinic says that yes, depression is a disorder. What about Johns Hopkins? Depression is a whole body illness. Seems pretty clear to me. To no one's surprise, similar pages show up for ADHD as well. That's about it for this one. He has some other hot takes on medical issues, including his opinion that drug addiction is not a disease. So let me take a quick look at that video.
So, I have always felt this way, and I want to give a little bit of who I am, so I can kind of validate my own personal experiences. So, I have personally an addictive behavior. I can be addicted to substance abuse. I can be addicted to working. If it's something that keeps me occupied, I can become addicted to it. I've been around junkies. I've known people that have died from overdose. And I'm like one person away from knowing many people that have died from overdose. I know I'm not alone there. You know, I know a lot of people know people that have passed away or had drug problems.
Good. It seems he at least understands that drug problems are a thing, and he has some experience with people abusing and overdosing. Maybe he knows a little bit about the topic. So, my initial question before continuing is, why do you think these people took so many drugs that it destroyed their lives and in some cases ended it?
It seems to me like in the past 5 years or so, I keep hearing people say that drug addiction is a disease. Now, to me, that's...
Oh, Christopher, what a sheltered life you must have led. People have been saying this for much longer. In fact, in 1956, the American Medical Association declared alcoholism as an illness. And in 1987, the American Medical Association and other medical organizations officially termed addiction a disease. So, even granting that you haven't heard it until recently, this isn't a new thing by any stretch of the imagination. We have known that addiction is a disease almost as long as we've known about AIDS.
Let me tell you why. Because there is no doctor. Let's say you're a heroin addict and you shared someone's needle and you inject yourself, and then like a couple days later your arm gets swollen, you get little spots all over your chest or some like that. And then you go to the doctor, they take your blood and they say, oh, you have a disease that you probably got from a needle from somebody else and it got passed down to you. Okay, let's say same junkie, use a clean needle, right? And nothing happens to you. And you go to the doctor and they take your blood and then they run tests with it. They are not going to say, oh, you have a disease called drug addiction. It doesn't exist. They can't take your blood and they can't see that.
Back to the if it can't be seen in your blood, it isn't real idea. While blood tests are used to help determine addiction, just a simple blood test cannot give sufficient information to warrant a diagnosis of drug addiction. Sure, I can grant this. Just like a blood test cannot determine whether you, Christopher, have intelligent thoughts, it also does not determine whether you are addicted to any kind of drugs. Why is a blood test an important criteria for you for things that aren't found in the blood?
Well, people say, well, it's a disease in the mind. It's a disease in the mind. Okay, well, let me tell you about that disease. Let me tell you what it really is. Drug addiction is this. It's somebody who got high and they really liked it, and they did it again, and they did it again, and they did it again, till it gets to the point where you're not using to get high anymore, you're using to maintain normalcy. That's not a disease. That's somebody who just likes being high. You know, it could be for many different reasons. Maybe they lacked some kind of love in childhood and they're trying to fill themselves back up with the feeling. Maybe they just like getting high too, and they just keep doing it.
Not close. Drug addiction is, according to the Mayo Clinic, a disease that affects a person's brain and behavior and leads to an inability to control the use of a legal or illegal drug or medication. It seems you are making up definitions to make it easier to attack. Do you know what that's called, Christopher? It's called a straw man fallacy. You are pretending that drug addiction is something it isn't and then attacking that definition instead of the actual one. People who are addicted to drugs may also like being high, but that is not necessarily the case.
Some drug addicts are the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. A lot of them have active minds, and I think if they could just put their energy and focus into something else, then they wouldn't need the drugs. I think I heard Jordan Peterson say...
Well, there's your problem right there. Word Salad Peterson is not a role model, and his quotes are pretty bad with just a modicum of evaluation. But let me give you a chance here. Maybe you have something profound to say, and it's not just a weird opinion.
Someone did a mouse test. There's something like, you put a dozen mice in a cage and you give them 2 water droplets. One is regular water and one is cocaine. Of course, they all get addicted to the cocaine because they don't all have a disease called drug addiction. They like being high. But then they did a test and they put little mouse wheels inside the cage and little toys. And then they noticed that the mice no longer had a preference between the cocaine water droplet and the regular water. It's because they included activities within their environment, so the mice weren't just subject to drugs. They had other things to do.
Shockingly, this is not true. In 2019, a study was done showing the differences were negligible and called into question the nature and the robustness of the effects touted by this referenced test. Though another study showed that mice who exercised were less likely to have as harmful of effects of cocaine addiction as mice that did not exercise. So, exercise can reduce the harmfulness of addiction in mice, but it can also reduce the harmfulness in other medical issues, so the point is moot.
But it's not a disease. It's just people who like to get high because it feels good.
Maybe I should have asked this from the start, but what do you mean by disease? According to the Oxford Dictionary, a disease is a disorder of structure or function in a human. The Mayo Clinic identifies drug addiction as a disease, and in its definition says it affects the person's brain or brain behavior. So that is the first definition covered. The second definition is a particular quality, habit, or disposition regarded as adversely affecting a person or group of people, You already said that drug addiction affects how people act and has adverse effects, so it is a disease by the second definition as well. So, what is your definition of disease, and how does drug addiction not fit as a disease?
No one can take your blood and say you have the disease of drug addiction. So, to all the drug addicts out there, and there's a lot of them, try quitting coffee. Then you'll start to realize like almost everyone's a drug addict. So you'll have a headache for 4 days. Anyway, for all you drug addicts out there, you don't have a disease. Don't use that as an excuse. Go find something that you love to do so you can put the shit away.
I have mixed feelings about this. On one hand, addiction is a real issue. To put addiction down as just an excuse is really belittling the people who do have severe problems. On the other hand, I do agree that people who have drug addiction problems should do everything they can reasonably do to get help. If you're trying to motivate, I can see the benefit to this message.
You do not have a disease. Don't let anyone tell you that, and don't fall for it.
According to virtually every medical organization I can find with any kind of decent standing, yes, drug addiction is a disease. According to multiple definitions given, yes, these people do have a disease. I don't know where you are getting your medical information from, but perhaps you should update it to a post-1987 world. That's it for this one. Christopher, I feel like a lot of your issues could be resolved with just a few moments on the old Google box doing the most cursory investigation. If you're honestly looking to get corrected when you're wrong, then I hope this helped. One of the fastest ways to find out if you're wrong is to put your opinions out on the internet. If you have any questions about any of this, I would be happy to point you to resources. Medical issues are not really something you can just put out wrong information on. This does a lot of harm, especially when you reach people who think similarly to what you do out of ignorance. It seems like you just don't know some things, and not knowing something is okay. That is the starting point to learning about the topic. It is another thing to put out bad information. Medical information especially you need to be careful with. For the rest of you, what did you think? A little shorter, but it doesn't take much time to find information on these points and post it for people. Do you think Christopher has a point here? Maybe I missed something important that you know about already. Maybe you have a medical expertise that goes against something I said here. Leave a comment below and help me be more educated on these topics. As per usual, hit that like button if you think I'm not just having some weird fever dream about conditions with which I've been diagnosed. Hit the subscribe button to help me respond to bad ideas with the sledgehammer of reality. As always, keep learning.